Welcome. This is Jean Eaton of Information Managers, your practice management mentor. It is my honor and pleasure to be with you today for Practice Management Nuggets. This is a weekly interview series with practice managers, healthcare providers, or trusted vendors who support healthcare practices. Our topics help primary care practice managers, healthcare providers, and owners to implement, maintain, or improve their business and practice administration so that healthcare providers can focus on providing quality healthcare services. I am your host, Jean Eaton, the Practice Management Mentor with Information Managers. And today I'm delighted to have Dave Rodwell with us as our guest for corporate security. Dave has developed his investigative acumen and expertise over a span of 28 years of service with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Over the years, he has handled a multitude of criminal investigations from shoplifting to murder. Dave has worked on some of Alberta's and Northwest Territories' most extensive investigations. Now in his semi-retirement, Dave has entered the field of private investigation and security consultation work. I met Dave at the CAPS meeting, our Society for Professional Speakers, and was delighted to find out the areas of overlap and the work that he does with security, helping organizations being prepared for those things that we don't want to typically be prepared for. So Dave has lots of experience to be able to share with us about preparing for the unexpected in your healthcare practice. Welcome, Dave.
Pleasure to be with you today.
I'm really excited to get into the details. You have so many stories. The hardest part is going to be able to keep us focused on just a few of them because we only have 30 minutes today. But for all of us who want to hear what you have to say, what would be your number one tip? What was the most important thing that you want to make sure people understand about security for their practices?
Well, first off, if a company has a good corporate security plan in place, they'll reduce the number of incidents, the number of issues that happen, and hopefully prevent a lot of crime from happening within their organization. You want to set up so that incidents don't occur that are going to cause all kinds of grief or harm to individuals within your organization. If I could suggest one thing that people should do, the most important thing to do is I think you have to ask yourself the question, what is the most devastating thing that could happen to our business? And when you figure out what that particular thing is, and it could be anywhere from having a traumatic bit of violence happen within the facility, or it could be a very important piece of equipment is somehow damaged that sets your company back, or it could be any one of a number of things. When you identify that thing, then you have to say, what can we do to make sure that this doesn't happen, or certainly mitigate the possibilities of it happen? That's the first step.
Okay, so identifying those devastating events and addressing it and making sure that you've got some mitigation methods in place so that doesn't happen, or if it does happen, you're prepared to respond to it.
Absolutely. It's in the planning. You know, from time to time, unexpected things happen within the business, and that's not the time. When the crisis is happening, is not the time to be planning and thinking about it. Maybe the manager's away or whatnot, and you're leaving it up to your employees to try to make the right decision. And often those decisions made in the heat of the moment are the wrong ones, are they the expensive ones. So I think a company has to sit down and say, what kind of catastrophes could happen to us? And then make sure that you've got a plan in place, and that plan is documented well, and the employees understand that when whatever it is happens, they can simply go to the bookshelf, pull off the thing, and there's the blueprint of all the steps they need to do to address that issue.
I think that's a really important part about making sure that we've got the documentation, that we have it available, and then the employees know exactly where to go when things happen.
Yeah. You have to make I have seen incidents where companies have got lots of good policy and procedure, but they haven't communicated it well to their staff, or they haven't shown them where it is. It's in addition to simply saying it's there. If that particular whatever it might be requires a bit of training or a bit of practice to make sure it flows good, that's what you do. Much the same as every building should be doing fire drills from point to point. It's the same concept. If you've got something you should be doing in certain steps you should be taking, they need to practice them once in a while just to make sure that they're on stream to do them.
That's a really important part. And you might have the tools in place and the staff know where to go to read the instructions, but if they don't have the confidence to actually implement it and make a decision when a decision needs to be made, you still haven't solved the problem.
That's right. Yeah, they have to feel comfortable about doing whatever it is they need to do. But I think the most important part is to have a plan in place to deal with those particular issues.
Excellent.
Okay.
So how did you get to this point? I mean, you've got a long history. You've done lots of great things. How did you get to the point where you were providing training and expertise and confidence building to organizations so that they can manage the security in their organizations?
Well, I think businesses tend to morph or change their identity as they grow or progress. I started out after I retired from policing into doing investigational work, with my niche mostly being in the area of corporate security, conducting investigations within corporations, catching internal thieves, harassment in the workplace complaints. That was the bulk of my work. And a number of years back, I had a chat with an owner and commented to him, it's been the third time I'd been back there catching one of his employees being a criminal and stealing from him. And I said, the way you run your business, you make it pretty easy for them. And he challenged me, and that was sort of my first venture into security consulting. And I did up a bit of a security manual for him so he understood what it's about. And, of course, since that time now, I've done lots of security reviews on different types of organizations, companies, everything from a hospital to a college to lots of different types of businesses. And it's looking at it from a set of eyes to say what could go wrong, and let's put some steps and measures. If somebody wants to commit a crime within a company, there's some sort of little red flag pops up to tell management, hey, this is happening. So it's putting those sort of things in place. One of the things I used to do was identify that you need to train your people on how to do this and that. From whether it would be a retail chain, and I'd say you need to train your people on shoplifting. And they would come back and say, we can't find somebody to do that. Can you do that? So I ended up developing some courses around the areas of corporate security that I deliver to customers now. So that sort of got me over into the speaking industry and training and speaking at conventions and things on corporate security.
Okay. That's a really good example about things that happen in healthcare. We are really focused on providing patient care, and that's, of course, a really important thing, but we tend to let things slide, like managing our cash drawer. Very few healthcare organizations actually train their staff to manage the cash. We tell them how to use their EMR so that they can create an invoice, but the cash management side tends to fall down. Any tips for that?
Well, I think that certainly cash is a tempting target for somebody that's having some financial difficulty. If you've got an employee, they may not normally be inclined to steal, but if the opportunity is there and it's left open, they will. Certainly in every healthcare facility, you've got strangers walking around. They could be relatives of some of the residents there, and to leave anything out in the open, easily accessible, that's a no-no. Basically, cash should be kept to a minimum. You only keep as much on hand as you need. It should be secured and some sort of control on it. Then, of course, every time you need a method of documenting what the cash is used for, or how it comes in and out of the cash box, if that's what you're using, or if you're using a cash register. Well, obviously, hopefully there's a till system to keep track of the auditing of how the money's coming in and out.
Right. So we have to think about, unfortunately, 80% of breaches tend to happen internally to the organization. And I like your phrase about having a tempting target. We want to be able to trust the people that we work with. We try to hire good people, but circumstances change, and what may not have been even on their radar when you hired them, their circumstances may have changed, and that cash box has got that extra $20 that they really need right now.
Yeah, there was a study done many years ago, and it was called the 20-60-20 theory. And that particular theory says that 20% of the population will not steal no matter what the circumstances are. They're the type of individuals, if they found $100,000 laying in a field, they would be turning it into the police's found property. They're the 100% honest person. We all hope that that's where we fit. At the bottom of the scale, though, is there's about 20% of the population that they like to steal every time they get an opportunity. If they won't nail it down, they just think you didn't want it all that bad, and they walk away with it. If you go in their houses, you'll find cutlery from restaurants and glasses from bars. They're that type of an individual. But in between is 60%, the vast majority of people or employees that work. They may steal. If you've created an opportunity or you leave an opportunity for them, and there's a reasonable chance they're not going to get caught. They believe I can get away with this. If they feel they're going to get caught, then they won't. So what corporate security is about is dealing with those 60% of the population. It's putting checks and balances in place so that they're aware that if you take something, it's going to show up missing off the inventory. Or if this happens, it's going to pop up the next morning in the accounting system. That type of a thing. So you need to put in those checks and balances so that if they are thinking about doing some stealing, they also realize that, hey, there's a good chance I'm going to get caught at this. And that kind of goes with maybe strategically placing some cameras so that, if you go into that room and steal something, you're going to be on camera. So depending what you need to protect and how you protect it, sometimes we use cameras for doing it. Sometimes it's just in the bookwork, how to set up the book so that if money happens, it disappears, you can trace it back. That's the last person that had the dealing with it.
Right. And then we need to make sure that we've got some good policies and procedures around it, not just to prevent the incident, but how are we going to manage the incident after it happens? So if there's a breach, a theft, a piece of violence, how do you record the incident? How do you record what you did about it? And then what are the outcomes? What are the consequences or disciplinary actions that might happen?
Yeah, normally what happens when I go into a corporation to do an internal investigation, we're there to find out what happened, and people often say, well, what is private investigation? We get answers to questions so somebody can make a decision. And it's the same even back in my old days as a policeman. We got facts, we collected information so that a judge could make a decision. Well, it's the same thing in an internal issue within a corporation. It's so senior management can make a decision. Do we fire this person? Is it what discipline should be handed out? But they need the knowledge to do it. Every organization should set up a process on how to do internal investigations within them. You need to train the people in the right way to do statement taking and how to do interviewing, and so that they have these things in place so that when something happens, you can call upon this team to come do the investigation, prepare a report that has everything they need in it, so that senior management can make those proper decisions. Whether you hire somebody externally to come in and do that, or whether you do it with internal staff, I mean, that depends upon the makeup of the organization. And it also depends upon what the incident is. If it was somebody suspected in senior management doing something wrong, or the complaint comes in, so it could be sexual harassment by a senior manager, then maybe you want somebody external coming in to do that type of thing. But that's the decision that each organization has to make. But again, the game plan should be there, the process should be laid out on paper, so that when it happens, you're not suddenly deciding how are we going to handle this.
That's a good point. So as part of the crisis response checklist, one of the things you should be thinking about is, should we have an internal investigation led by someone within the organization, or perhaps do we need to contact somebody outside of the organization?
Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, whatever the results of the investigation is, the people that are involved, and that includes the other employees that maybe work in that same area or field, have to believe that the investigation was done fairly and without any bias. Because you don't want at the end of the day, and let's hypothetically talk about a sexual harassment complaint. If the complaint is found unfounded, you don't want people saying, yeah, well, it was unfounded because the people that did the investigation, I know they golf with them, and that sort of thing. So you want to make sure that whoever you're selecting to do the work have a reputation of being fair and unbiased in their work, and they have good sound judgment. And but that's how you would set that up ahead of time.
Right. That's not something that you go shopping for at the last moment.
No, you would have your game plan in place, and you execute the game plan if something happens.
Right. Okay. Well, that's a really important part. We can talk for hours, and we have, but we've only got a short period of time. So one of the things that I know that I've experienced is a theft from one employee from another employee. So someone else has pickpocketed someone else's purse because it wasn't maintained securely. And even though it wasn't a theft against the business, it really puts a strain on the employees that you're suspecting somebody else, one of your coworkers, has invaded your privacy, and that makes a huge difference in the organization as well.
Yeah, we often when we're doing security reviews look at how do people secure their property. If you had a secretarial tool and you had a bunch of people that have their own desk, it's a simple thing to put a lock on a desk. And I know the ladies like to have their purses close at hand. So is there a door on a desk that could have a lock put on it so that they have a place to lock up their whatever the property is they want to secure? Lots of times in large industrial things, we will install a bank of lockers, and people put their own padlock on it, much like when you go to school. You've got your own little locker, and you put your stuff in it, and then it becomes your responsibility to safeguard your property. And if it goes missing, well, you had a place you could have locked it up, and you really then simply become sometimes the author of your own misfortune. We like to believe that we can put anything in a desk drawer and it's safe. The fact of the matter is there is a certain percentage of people that like to take stuff.
That's true. One of the things that we wanted to talk about too was the working alone. So in healthcare practices, we tend to have very few people at the front of the office, and we get a lot of people coming in through the doors, and sometimes intentionally and sometimes unintentionally. What would you like to make sure that we know about as far as having our front office staff, which are typically the people with the least experience, about how we should be training them about working alone?
Well, first of all, in the province of Alberta, for those that are listeners that are in Alberta, and I think you'll find similar legislature in the other provinces, so I'm not sure where all our listeners are from. There's legislation in Alberta, and it's called the Working Alone legislation, and it's there's a law in the books in Alberta that says that every organization or company has to do what is called a working alone assessment. And basically that means that you have to identify which employees work alone. Their definition of working alone is that you're out of verbal communication, and that's not by phone or something else, but you're out of verbal communication with another employee when you're working. So it could be an individual who works in a far back office and is out of calling thing. You can have a young person who works with chemicals in a boiler room. It could be that they travel alone in a vehicle. They're working alone. So the rules say that you have to identify which individuals work alone, what their duties are. And if you had a bunch doing similar duties, you could lump them together. What unfortunate thing could happen to them? So what could befall them in their duties? So if they were handling cash and the public had access to them, say like a retail, maybe they're in the close to a door and they're in the cafeteria part, and there could be a robbery, then maybe one of the things you would look at and say, well, they could be robbed. So what could we do to mitigate this harm coming to them? Well, maybe you would give them some training on what to do in the case of an armed robbery. Maybe you put in an alarm system. Maybe you put up some cameras in that area with lots of signage to say this area is under video surveillance to deter them. Now, the government says that whatever you need to do to mitigate the chances of that happening, reasonable. They're not asking you to have security guards stationed at every little corner and walkway. The government was really good and says it has to be reasonable. If those reasonable measures that you have to take to safeguard your employees indicate that there's some training, then you have to be able to show documented that you have done that training. Now, you could have a disgruntled employee phone and say, complain to the government that you're working alone and they're not safely protecting you. An inspector can come out and he will ask, where's your booklet, where's your documentation that you've gone through this NIDL process? If you haven't gone through the process, he can actually shut down the business until you go through the process. There's some substantial fines involved if you fail to comply with the law. But as well, it can really impact your insurance, because most insurance policies have a clause in it that says if you're operating contrary to the laws of the land, this policy is null and void. So you could, in fact, be operating without insurance. So when an unfortunate incident happens in your place and you're going to your insurance company looking to have them pay for whatever the circumstances might be, they may have an out. So I think it's important to do it. Now, the government did an excellent job of creating a guide. It's online. I believe you've put the link to it on the website. It's a simple download. It's not a hard procedure to do. But everybody should do it, and you do it because, first of all, you want your company to be compliant with the law. But most importantly, is it's going to force you to take some steps to make sure that your employees are working in a safe environment. And this whole act came out of a terrible incident that happened in Calgary, where a young man was murdered in a gas station as an attendant working alone, and that's the emphasis for what this law was about.
Unfortunately, we don't have to go far to find good examples about why we should be doing this.
Absolutely. There is no shortage of violence in the workplace, and organizations need to take, healthcare facilities need to take steps to make sure that their staff are trained on how to handle angry people, how to diffuse anger, and I mean, every day in the newspaper you'll read about incidents that are occurring. They're becoming more and more commonplace, it seems.
It certainly does. And on your website, you've got all sorts of great resources about how to deal with angry people, some checklists. The security checklist that you have, securityspeaking.com, what a great company security audit. That's a wonderful tool, and I strongly recommend everybody take a moment, because it only takes a few minutes. It doesn't take a long. And tell us how you think that we should be using that tool, Dave.
Well, basically what I did was I created a number of years just a little bit of a security audit that a company could take. And it covers the areas with a little simple question. And it will ask you a question, and you then think, is our company doing this, or should we be doing this? And where you feel that you're deficient or you're not up to as good as you should be, you put a check mark in that little blank. And if at the end of going through the little audit, and you don't have to do it yourself, you can make a whole bunch of copies of it and give it to a bunch of employees and ask them to get their thoughts or feelings on it, because everybody comes from a different perspective. To fill it out, go through the little exercise, and you're right, it only takes about 5-10 minutes. And if you've got a whole bunch of check marks, then you have some issues, and you really should start looking at doing some corporate security work and to improve your system. Right.
I know in the line of work that we have to think about all those bad things that could go wrong. And I know I've been asked, doesn't that make it you must hate your work because you're thinking about all these bad things that can go wrong. But Chris Hatfield had a great comment about that in his book. He says that thinking of all those things that could go wrong and planning to prepare for it doesn't make you feel like you're in a negative experience. It makes you feel that you are the best prepared individual to do the job and feel confident that you can address any of these bad situations should they come up.
If you've got if you've got a good game plan in place, when something untoward happens, you have the feeling of confidence. You know that you're going to what steps you're going to be take, that they've been thought out well, they've been measured, and that at the end you're going to have the best results you can at dealing with whatever the tragedy or whatever the issue is that's happened within the corporation. So it's kind of comforting to know that these things are all in place, and that when whatever it is hits the fan, you've got the ability to deal with it.
It is very comforting, and you've given us some great tools to be able to deal with that. We need to wrap up in a couple of minutes. Is there any burning things that you want to share with us, Dave?
Well, just that I think that procrastination, of course, it's easy to say, yeah, we got to do that somewhere down the road. If you really have these burning issues dealing within your companies, deal with them now, because it feels really horrible. And I've dealt with companies that have had issues befall them, and they say to me, oh, I wish we'd have done this a month ago. Why didn't we do this? Don't have that feeling of disappointment because we didn't do something now.
I totally agree. I often say doing nothing is not an option. You don't have to do it all, but you can't not do anything.
Yep, it's looking at where your weaknesses are and doing a little planning, and you do little step-by-step little bits depending what your budget and time allows you to do. But come up with a game plan.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been really valuable. You've given us lots of resources. You've been very generous with your time and your example. And I'm hoping that our audience will take that time to take a look at your security audit. I think that's a great tool to be able to get things started. And we can find you if we need some external help to facilitate some of these conversations. We have some document management tips on our website about doing some security items. We need to make sure that we provide the skills for our employees so that they can be confident about dealing with the situations that they might encounter. And talking about it and being prepared for it is going to make us all be able to sleep a little better at night.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dave. It's been a delight to chat with you, and I know that we'll talk some more.
Thank you, and pleasure being with you today.
Take care.
Bye.
This is Jean Eaton, your practice management mentor with Information Managers. Thanking you for joining us today. Take a look at these valuable resources that have been available, and stay tuned.